I was born beneath the shadow of the great house, but it was not greatness that reached into me. It was hunger, it was sorrow. It was the iron weight of chains that I could not see but felt with every breath. They call this place the Ravencraftoft Plantation, a name heavy with pride for them. But for us, it was a name soaked in tears. We were told to speak it with obedience, yet every time I let the syllables pass my lips, it tasted of ash. I was Saraphina, daughter of the soil and of a line of women who carried more in their blood than the master could ever understand. From the moment I first drew breath, the elders whispered that my eyes carried the mark of something deeper. They said when I stared too long, the air trembled, as if unseen hands stirred it. My grandmother Oye touched my forehead when I was still a child and said, "You are not just of this world, little one. The ancestors walk with you." I did not understand then, but in time, I would learn that truth was not spoken to comfort, it was spoken to prepare. I was a mother before I was truly a woman, and it was through my children that joy dared to bloom in such a cursed place. Their laughter was small sunlight breaking through the heavy clouds of misery, but even sunlight is stolen when the master wills it. I will never forget the day they came, the day the bonds of my life were torn asunder. The overseer's whip cracked not against my back that morning, but against my spirit. My children, my heart, my blood were led away like livestock. Their cries carried across the yard, high and sharp, piercing deeper than any lash could ever reach. I begged. I fell to my knees in the mud, my hands clawing the earth as if I could hold them here by sheer force of will. But the master's eyes were cold. To him their lives were coin, their tears nothing more than noise. He looked at me with disdain and said, "You will birth more." I screamed until my throat bled. I cursed his name beneath my breath, knowing he could not hear the words, but the ancestors could. That night I lay on the dirt floor of my cabin, my body trembling with rage so fierce I thought it might tear me apart. I pressed my palms into the ground and whispered to those who had walked before me, "If you hear me, if you see me, do not let this go unanswered." The wind slipped through the cracks of the cabin walls, carrying with it the faint scent of smoke and the sound of footsteps that were not there. It was then I knew. They had heard. In the days that followed, the grief did not leave me, but it began to change. It no longer sat as a stone upon my chest, it moved through me like fire. I began to feel the stirrings of something vast pressing close, like standing at the edge of a storm before it breaks. The air hummed around me when I walked through the fields. Shadows stretched where they should not have. Sometimes, when I closed my eyes, I saw not the cabin or the rows of cane, but faces I had never known but recognized all the same. Ancestors, blood of my blood, whispering across time. It was not only sorrow they gave me, it was power. I started to remember the old ways the master thought he had beaten out of us. I sang the songs my grandmother taught me, low and steady beneath my breath, words that carried more than melody, they carried memory. At night, I lit candles made from animal fat, setting them at the edges of the fields. The flames did not waver, not even when the wind blew strong. The land itself seemed to bend, listening. The other enslaved whispered my name differently after that, some with reverence, some with fear. "Saraphina," they said, "the one who speaks to shadows." I did not claim the title. I did not need to. It settled on me the way dew settles on the grass at dawn, naturally, inevitably. Still, beneath every whispered word, beneath every flicker of candlelight and gust of ancestral wind, there was the hollow ache of my children's absence. Their laughter haunted me, not as torment but as reminder. My grief was not my weakness, it was my weapon. And though I did not yet know how to wield it fully, I swore by every drop of blood in my body and every spirit that hovered at my side that I would see the Ravencraftoft name broken. The master thought he had taken everything from me when he sold my children. What he had done was awaken something he could never chain, never whip, never kill. He had given me purpose. He had given me the fury of a mother with nothing left to lose, and the blessing of ancestors with everything to gain. And so the bonds he shattered became the fire that would consume him. Grief is a heavy chain, but it can also be a key. In the nights that followed my children's theft, I found myself walking paths I had never dared tread. I was drawn, as if pulled by unseen hands, to the burial ground beyond the edge of the cane fields, where the soil was rich with the bones of those who had suffered before me. Some called it cursed land, a place where no crops grew and no laughter lingered. To me it was sacred. It was where the voices grew louder. I remember the first night I stood there, bare feet sinking into the cool earth. The moon was a thin silver blade in the sky, cutting through the darkness. The air was thick, charged like the hush before a storm. I carried nothing with me but a bowl of water and a bundle of herbs wrapped in cloth. My grandmother Oya's voice echoed in my memory. When you are ready, the door will open. But remember, child, doors swing both ways. I set the bowl on the ground and sprinkled the herbs into the water. The scent of sage and wild mint rose sharp into the air. I knelt, pressing my palms into the dirt, whispering names I had never spoken aloud, but knew as surely as my own. I called upon the mothers who had lost children, upon the warriors chained in ships, upon the healers who had kept the old ways alive in secret. And as I spoke, the wind shifted. It did not move as wind should. It circled, it coiled, it seemed to breathe. The earth answered. A low hum rose beneath me, traveling up through my bones until my whole body vibrated with it. My eyes stung not from tears, but from the force of what stirred there. And then I felt her, Oya, not just as memory, not just as a voice, but as presence. She stood behind me, unseen yet undeniable, her hand heavy and warm on my shoulder. Grandmother, I whispered. My voice broke, not from fear, but from the weight of recognition. Her words came like thunder hidden inside wind. You have been chosen not because you are strong, but because you have been broken. Broken things let the light through. Broken things let the spirits through. I bowed my head, my forehead pressed against the earth. They took my babies, I said. They left me with nothing, nothing, nothing. Oya's laugh rolled like distant storm clouds. Child, they left you with everything. They left you with rage, with memory, with the bones of your people and the fire of your blood. Use it. The bowl of water rippled, though no hand touched it. Reflections twisted in its surface. Faces, dozens, hundreds, eyes burning like coals. They watched me, silent but waiting. I felt no terror, only certainty. The door had opened and I was standing at its threshold. That night marked a turning. I rose from the burial ground with a different weight inside me. Not despair. No, despair had been burned away. What remained was resolve sharpened into a blade. The Ravencraftoft name would fall, not by my hands alone, but by the hands of every spirit who lingered in the soil they had stained with blood. In the days that followed, the signs multiplied. When I walked past the cabins, children grew quiet and stared as if they could see something trailing behind me. Dogs whimpered and backed away, tails tucked low. Even the overseer's eyes flickered with unease when I lifted my head to meet his gaze. He spat and muttered about witchcraft, but he did not linger near me. Power unsettled him, though he could not name it. At night the whispers grew clearer. I no longer heard only fragments but full sentences. Words in tongues that were not mine yet felt familiar on my lips when I repeated them. I wrote them in the dirt with a stick, patterns that spiraled and looped like the rivers of Africa my ancestors had once walked beside. The land remembered, and through me it began to speak again. One evening as the sun sank red into the horizon, I felt the first true surge of it. A storm rose suddenly, clouds boiling out of nowhere, wind snapping the cane until it bent nearly flat. The master cursed and shouted for the workers to gather the harvest before it was ruined. But I stood still, my arms lifted, letting the rain soak me through. Lightning cracked so close I smelled the scorched air, and in its flash I saw them. The shadows of men and women moving through the rows, their eyes alight, their chains broken. They marched, not toward freedom but toward vengeance. And I knew this was only the beginning. The door had been opened. What walked through it would not return quietly. The first time they revealed themselves within the master's house, it was not subtle. The ancestors did not come to whisper anymore. They came to be seen, to be felt, to be feared. It was evening. The Ravencraftofts gathered in their dining hall, feasting as though their bellies were not filled by the work of our broken bodies. I had been sent inside to serve, carrying a tray of roasted meat, while the mistress prattled about her silks ordered from New Orleans. The master's laughter boomed, hollow and cruel, while his children picked at their plates, sneering at each other. But even as I walked among them, I felt the shift. The air grew heavy, pressing down like a storm sky just before lightning. My hands trembled on the tray, not from fear but from recognition. The ancestors had followed me in. The first sign came when the candles sputtered. Their flames shrank to pinpoints, as if sucked inward by unseen mouths. Shadows thickened along the walls, not stretching from the family as they should, but moving against the light, curling upward like smoke. A cold draught swept the room, though no door had opened. The mistress shivered and reached for her shawl, frowning. Then the glassware trembled. Every cup, every crystal pitcher, vibrating in a slow, steady rhythm, as though echoing a heartbeat too large to belong to any living being. The children gasped. Benjamin, the youngest, set down his fork and whispered, "Mama, someone's here." The master slammed his fist against the table. Nonsense. It's the storm outside, but there was no storm. Only silence pressing against the windows, a silence so deep I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. Then the voices came, low at first, like a murmur under the floorboards. Then louder, weaving together dozens upon dozens, chanting in tongues the family did not understand. I did. I recognized the cadence of old prayers, the rhythms of my grandmother's songs. It was the language of the stolen rising up from beneath the very foundation of the house. The mistress shrieked when her wine glass shattered in her hand, crimson spilling across the white cloth like fresh blood. The children cried out. Benjamin clutched his ears, rocking in his chair as though the voices were inside his skull. The master rose, face flushed with anger. "Show yourself." He bellowed into the empty room. His voice cracked at the edges. For the first time I saw the mask slip. Beneath his bluster, fear quivered, and the ancestors answered. The chandelier above, heavy with crystal, began to sway as if caught by phantom winds. The walls groaned, wood bending under invisible weight, and in the far corner of the room the shadows thickened, pulling together until they formed the outline of a figure. Tall, indistinct, yet undeniable. Its head bent low, its arms stretched wide, as though embracing the room in judgment. Mistress Ravencraftoft fainted at the sight, slumping against her chair. One of the daughters screamed until her throat grew hoarse. Benjamin whispered over and over, "I see them, I see them, I see them," his voice both awed and broken. The master snatched the Bible from the mantel, his hands trembling as he thrust it forward. "In the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, I command you, leave this house." The figure did not leave. The voices only grew louder, harmonizing into a sound that rattled the very bones of the walls. And when the master tried to speak again, the words died in his throat. His lips moved, but no sound came out. The ancestors had stolen his voice. I stood frozen, the tray clutched against my chest, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break free. Yet I was not afraid. No, what I felt was vindication. For once it was not us trembling, not us cowering, it was them. The figure in the shadows lifted its hand, and every candle in the room went out at once. Darkness swallowed us whole. The children wailed, the mistress moaned faintly, the master stumbled blindly, gasping like a man drowning. Only Benjamin was silent, his eyes wide, glowing faintly in the blackness as though lit from within. And then, as suddenly as it began, it ended. The candles flared back to life, though no match had touched them. The figure was gone, the voices silenced. Only shards of glass and spilled wine remained as proof. The Ravencraftofts sat in stunned silence, pale and shaking. The master's hand still clutched the Bible, knuckles white, lips trembling with words he could not form. The mistress stared blankly at the crimson stains spreading across the cloth, her breath shallow. I set down the tray with steady hands, bowing my head to hide the fire in my eyes. Inside me, the ancestors pulsed strong and proud. The door had been opened wide, and now they had stepped fully through. The family thought themselves untouchable, masters of life and death. That night they learned the dead had their own masters, and they did not serve flesh and blood. Word of the haunting spread quickly, though the Ravencraftofts tried to keep it locked inside their walls. Servants whispered. Overseers crossed themselves when they thought no one was looking, and even the enslaved on neighboring plantations began to murmur that something was stirring at Ravencraftoft. Fear is hard to contain. It seeps through cracks like smoke. The master, desperate to reassert control, summoned Reverend Whitmore from the nearby parish. Whitmore was a stout man with a voice that carried like a trumpet. His sermons always filled with fire about obedience and sin. He had stood many times in front of us in the fields, Bible raised high, shouting that our chains were God's will. To him we were heathens in need of salvation. To me he was another jailer dressed in cloth instead of leather. When he arrived, his face was red with confidence, his chest puffed like a rooster. He strode into the great house with his Bible under one arm and a flask tucked into his coat, certain his words could drive away what lingered. "Fear not," he boomed, "for the Lord has given me authority over devils and demons alike." I watched from the shadows of the hall as he set to work. He sprinkled holy water across the door frames, muttering prayers in Latin, his voice echoing against the wood. The family clung to his every word, desperate for relief. The mistress wrung her hands, the daughters knelt beside her, and the master stood tall as though Whitmore's presence alone restored his power. But I felt the ancestors watching. They were not cowed by his rituals. They circled like wolves, curious, amused. The Reverend's words rolled off the walls and vanished like mist. That night, Whitmore commanded the family to kneel in the parlor. He placed the Bible on the table, its cover worn from years of use, and declared he would cast out the evil with the authority of Christ. His voice rose, strong and certain, filling the room. "By the blood of the Lamb, I command all unclean spirits to depart." For a heartbeat, the house was still, then the fire roared. The hearth, which had been smouldering with faint embers, erupted with a blaze so fierce it nearly leapt into the room. The Reverend stumbled back, clutching his Bible. The daughters screamed, clutching at each other. The voices began again, low, rhythmic, undeniable. They did not chant in English or Latin, but in the rolling cadences of Africa, words Whitmore could not understand. But I understood they were not words of devils. They were words of defiance, prayers of the enslaved, hymns to gods older than the Reverend's church. Whitmore's face paled. He shouted louder, his words tumbling over themselves as he tried to drown out the chants. "In the name of Jesus Christ, Son of the living God, I command you." But then the voices shifted. They spoke in English, clear and booming, echoing from no mouth and every mouth at once. "Did Jesus chain us? Did Jesus whip us? Did Jesus sell our children? No, it was you. It was your kind who built this hell and called it holy." The Reverend's knees buckled. His Bible slipped from his hand, falling open on the floor. He tried to lift it again, but his hands shook too violently. Sweat poured down his face as the fire snapped and hissed, sparks leaping dangerously close. The mistress fainted once more. The master stood rigid, jaw clenched, but his eyes darted wide with terror he could not hide. The children sobbed into their hands. I stood silent in the corner, my breath steady, my heart hammering with a fierce kind of joy. For years, Whitmore had wielded his words as shackles, telling us our suffering was God's will. Now the ancestors had spoken, and they had stripped him bare. He fled before dawn. His sermons never returned to Ravencraftoft. In the church weeks later, it was said that he had lost his fire, that his words no longer carried the same conviction. He mumbled through his readings, his eyes darting toward shadows as though afraid of what lurked there. The congregation whispered, but he never spoke of what he had seen that night. The master raged at his weakness, calling him a coward, but even his anger could not erase the truth. Whitmore had been defeated not by devils, but by the truth he had spent his life denying. That night, when I returned to my cabin, I lit a single candle and placed it by the window. Its flame stood tall, unwavering, though the wind outside rattled the shutters. I whispered to the ancestors, "Thank you. Thank you for showing them that the chains they forged are not stronger than the voices of the dead." And in the stillness I felt Oya's hand once more on my shoulder, heavy with pride. The family thought they could silence the past with prayers and scriptures. But the past was not gone. It had only been waiting, and now it had found its voice. After the Reverend fled, the Ravencraftofts clung to silence, as if refusing to speak of the haunting would somehow banish it. But silence does not close a door once it has been opened. If anything, it invites the voices to press harder, and they did until they found their way into the mouth of the one least prepared to bear them. It began with Benjamin. He was the youngest, a boy of no more than 8, with wide eyes and a softness the master had not yet beaten out of him. Unlike his sisters, who parroted their mother's cruelty, Benjamin often lingered near the cabins, watching us work with a curiosity not yet sharpened into hatred. Still, he was his father's son, raised in luxury on the backs of our broken bodies. I never trusted the gentleness of children born to power. It could turn sharp with time, but the ancestors chose him, and that was not my doing. One night, I was roused from sleep by a sound outside my cabin. At first, I thought it was the wind, but then I heard it. A child's voice, soft and low, speaking words no white child should know. I stepped into the night air and found Benjamin standing barefoot in the dirt, his nightshirt hanging loose, eyes closed. His lips moved quickly, spilling a river of syllables I recognized but had never taught him. The language of my grandmother, the words of the old country carried across the sea. The hairs on my arms rose. The boy was not awake. He was walking, speaking like one possessed. I followed as he wandered past the fields, his bare feet leaving prints that glowed faintly in the moonlight. The night was still, yet the air hummed, alive with unseen movement. He stopped at the edge of the burial ground and finally opened his eyes. But they were not his eyes. They glowed faint, not with fire but with reflection, as though 1,000 faces stared out from behind them. When he spoke again, his voice was layered, carrying not just his own tone, but the tones of many deep and high, male and female, blending into a chorus. "They took us from the water," he said. "They broke us in chains, but we are not gone." My breath caught. "Who speaks through you?" I whispered. His head turned toward me slowly, unnaturally, like a puppet pulled by unseen strings. "We are the drowned, the beaten, the mothers and the sons. We are your blood, Saraphina. And we remember. At the sound of my name, my knees weakened. The boy swayed, but the voices held him up. He began to speak of things no child could know, names of my people, the faces of my children stolen from me, their cries still echoing across the waters of time. Tears burned down my cheeks as I stepped closer. My babies, I whispered, do you see them? Benjamin's head tilted, his small voice echoing with others. They are not lost. They are with us. They sing in the dark. They wait for you. The world blurred before me. I reached out trembling, but dared not touch him. My hands hovered, unsure if I would disturb the fragile thread that bound him to the spirits. Then, as suddenly as it began, the glow left his eyes. His body crumpled, and I caught him before he struck the ground. He was limp, breathing shallow, his lips still moving faintly as if whispering to unseen ears. I carried him back toward the big house, my arms shaking not from his weight, but from the enormity of what had just passed through him. The next morning the family was in uproar. The mistress wailed that her son was cursed, that devils had lodged in his soul. The master, red with rage, demanded to know if I had bewitched him. I kept my gaze steady, my voice calm. I did nothing. It is the dead who speak. If you wish to silence them, ask yourself what wrong you have done. He struck me hard across the face, but even as pain blossomed, I saw fear flicker in his eyes. He could whip me, starve me, lock me away, but he could not strike the dead from his son. In the nights that followed, Benjamin continued his wanderings. He spoke in tongues when the moon was high, reciting histories of ships and shackles, prayers whispered in chains. Sometimes he woke with mud caked on his feet, though no one had seen him leave his bed. Sometimes he wept in his sleep, crying out names he could never have known. The family grew frantic. They locked his door, posted guards, even chained the windows shut. Yet still, they found him standing in the yard at dawn, eyes wide, lips moving with voices that were not his own. To me it was clear. The ancestors had chosen their vessel, and through him they would deliver truth the family could not ignore. And though he was their son, he belonged to the dead now. The earth remembers. More than men, more than books, the ground itself holds memory. Every lash that split our backs, every drop of blood that darkened the soil, it all sank into the land. The Ravencraftofts thought the earth was theirs to command, that it would bear their crops forever. But even dirt has limits. Even dirt grows weary of cruelty. The first sign was the corn. Rows that had stood tall in the summer sun suddenly withered. The stalks bent as though a great weight pressed them down, their leaves curling brown long before the season's end. The overseer cursed and whipped the workers harder, as if we had the power to coax life from soil already poisoned with sorrow. But no lash could command the harvest. The ears came in shriveled, kernels hollow, fit only for the hogs. I remember standing in the field one morning, the dew still fresh, when I reached for a bowl that should have been white as bone. Instead, it was streaked with black fibers tangled with mildew, as though the earth itself refused to give them clean. My fingers tingled when I touched it, a whisper running through me. Enough. The master blamed us, as always. He shouted that we were lazy, that we had cursed his fortune with our slowness. He stormed into the cabins at night, overturning pots, searching for charms that were not there. His rage spilled onto our bodies, but each blow only deepened the land's refusal. The animals grew restless next. Horses reared at unseen shapes, eyes rolling white. Dogs refused to enter the fields, whimpering at the edges as though shadows bared teeth we could not see. Even the birds abandoned the trees, their songs fading until the mornings rang hollow with silence. It was not just hunger creeping in. It was judgment. One night, a storm rolled over the plantation, not with thunder or lightning, but with a wind so fierce, it stripped shingles from the roofs and scattered tools across the yard. When the family rose at dawn, they found the words we remember carved into the soil of the main road. Letters etched deep by no hand, but by the force of the storm itself. The mistress wailed. The daughters clung to her skirts. The master stood pale, jaw-locked, though his hands shook as he read the words aloud. He ordered the slaves to smooth the road to bury the message. But when the dirt was leveled, the words returned by nightfall, darker, clearer, as though the earth would not let them be erased. I felt the ancestors all around me then, their presence as heavy as the humid air. They moved through the trees, rattled through the branches, stirred the waters in the well. I lit candles in my cabin and whispered prayers to Oya, goddess of storms, and I knew she heard me. The master tried to fight back with his tools of power. He brought more overseers, men with rifles and whips, as if steel and leather could command roots and rivers. He poured salt into the fields, thinking it would cleanse the soil, but the ground spat it back. The rain came sudden and harsh, washing the salt into his own gardens, killing his roses and herbs. He accused me of witchcraft, of conjuring spirits against him. He dragged me before the family in the parlor, his hand wrapped tight around my arm. "You are the cause of this," he spat, his face red with fury. "You and your heathen gods. You'll pay for this, Saraphina." But before he could strike me again, the fire in the hearth exploded outward. Flames leapt higher than the chimney, licking the ceiling beams. The family screamed, scattering like frightened birds. Only I stood still, the heat rushing past me without harm. In that blaze I felt the earth's breath, hot and righteous, telling me, "We are with you, hold steady." That night, the master forbade the mention of spirits. He forbade the slaves from singing in the fields, from drumming on the cabins, from whispering prayers in the dark. But forbidding does not erase. The silence he demanded was broken each time the wind howled, each time the trees bent low, each time the soil split open with cracks shaped like scars. The land no longer answered to him. It answered to us, to the dead who had been buried without markers, to the blood that had seeped into its veins, to the cries that had never been forgotten. And I, standing barefoot on that cursed soil, felt power stir in me like a tide rising. For the first time I realized it was not only the family that was haunted. The plantation itself had turned against its master. The curse did not strike all at once. It crept in slowly, like a sickness in the bones, until the mistress could no longer pretend her prayers or silks could shield her. It began with fainting spells. At first, the family thought it nothing. She had always been delicate, prone to swoons when the air grew heavy or when her husband's temper rose. But these spells were different. She would collapse in the middle of supper, spoons slipping from her fingers, eyes rolling back until only the whites showed. When she woke, her voice trembled, and she muttered of shadows standing over her bed, watching as she slept. At night I could hear her cries through the thin walls of the great house. She called out names that were not her own, voices she had no right to know. Sometimes she screamed in languages her tongue should never have shaped, African words, raw and heavy, spilling from her mouth like blood. The master struck her when she spoke them, desperate to silence what he did not understand, but striking her only made the voices louder. Her daughters began to avoid her bedchamber. They whispered that their mother's eyes looked strange, as though something else peered through them. I saw it too. When I was sent to deliver broth or water, she would grip my wrist with surprising strength, her nails digging into my flesh. "They're coming for me," she hissed, her breath sour, her lips cracked. "The ones you buried, the ones you called. Tell them I didn't mean it." Tell them it was not me who held the whip, but I said nothing. For once, silence was my shield. Her body weakened quickly. Her skin grew sallow, her hair fell loose, her voice rasped from thirst. Yet even as she decayed, the house filled with strange scents, burnt sugar, iron, and salt, odors that no doctor could explain. The master summoned physicians from town, men in fine coats carrying leeches and powders. They bled her, dosed her, prayed over her. Nothing eased her suffering. One night, I was roused by commotion in the big house. I crept close, drawn by the wailing. The mistress was thrashing in her bed, sheets tangled around her limbs. Her husband and daughters struggled to hold her down as her body convulsed. And then, in a voice that was not her own, she cried out, "We fed your children to the sea. Now the sea will feed on you." The room froze. The master's face drained of color, his daughters clutched one another, and the mistress's body went limp. Only the rasp of her breath filled the silence. The doctor muttered about fever dreams, about humors gone awry. But I knew better. The dead had slipped into her mouth, forcing her to speak truths buried under years of denial. By dawn, she was too weak to rise. Her skin burned with heat, though the room was cool. Her lips blistered as though she had swallowed fire. I brought her water, and when she looked at me, her gaze was not her own. Her eyes gleamed like wet stones, hard and bottomless. "You did this," she whispered. Her voice was low, cracked but sharp with accusation. "You and your heathen magic. You've turned the soil, you've cursed my house." I leaned close, so only she could hear. "No curse of mine could match the curse of what you've done. The land remembers, the dead remember. You are only reaping what you planted." Her breath rattled, fury mixing with fear. She tried to lift her hand to strike me, but it fell limp against the bed. By the next week, she could no longer speak. Her mouth gaped open, her tongue swollen, her breath shallow and ragged. The house stank of sickness, and the servants tiptoed as though afraid the air itself might swallow them. The daughters wept in corners, the master paced like a beast trapped in a cage, but none could slow her decline. When she died, it was not gentle. She did not fade into silence as many do. She screamed, long, sharp, tearing at the walls, as though unseen hands dragged her toward a place she fought to avoid. The sound carried through the plantation, reaching even the cabins. We all heard it, and none of us doubted who had come for her. When at last her voice broke and silence fell, the master staggered from her chamber, face pale as ash. His daughters wailed, clinging to him, but I saw what he did not want them to see. The tremor in his hands, the wetness in his eyes, the way he glanced at the shadows as though expecting them to leap. The mistress was buried in the family plot, under a heavy stone carved with scripture, but stone cannot protect the soul. That night, I dreamed of her face, twisted with terror, mouth open in an endless scream. Behind her the waters churned, and arms reached from the waves to drag her down. I woke with a start, heart pounding, but even in fear I smiled. The curse had claimed its first, and it would not be the last. After the mistress's death, the house grew colder, not in temperature but in spirit. Curtains hung heavy, mirrors were shrouded, and the halls echoed with a silence that pressed on the chest like stone. Yet grief alone did not explain what followed. The curse was patient, yes, but it never slept. And now it turned its gaze upon the daughters. There were 3 of them. Catherine, the eldest, proud and sharp. Eliza, the middle one, quiet but watchful. And little Anne, still with ribbons in her hair. It was Catherine who first. She was her mother's mirror in every way, slender, pale, with a voice trained to cut. I had felt her cruelty since she was small, for she practiced her power on us the way her father did, striking at the weakest just to taste dominance. Yet even she could not shield herself when the dead reached out. It began with whispers. Servants reported that Catherine spoke to no one in the halls, yet her lips moved as though carrying on a conversation. When asked, she would snap that she had said nothing, but I had seen it myself. Her head tilting, her eyes darting as though listening to voices no one else could hear. One evening, as I carried linens up the stairs, I heard her laughter spill from her chamber. It was sharp, too sharp, like glass breaking. I peered through the cracked door. She sat before her mirror, brushing her hair with slow, deliberate strokes. And behind her, though the room was empty, shadows gathered. Not shapes exactly, but densities in the air, thick and pulsing. She laughed again, her gaze locked on her reflection. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will tell him. Yes, I will make her bleed. The brush slipped from my hands, and the clatter broke the spell. Catherine whipped her head toward the door, eyes wide, and for a heartbeat I saw not her eyes but something else staring out. Dark, depthless, unblinking. I fled before she could speak. After that night, Catherine unraveled quickly. She wandered the halls at midnight, her gown trailing across the floor, her hair wild. She muttered to herself, sometimes giggling, sometimes cursing. She scratched her arms until they bled, insisting insects crawled beneath her skin. The doctor called it hysteria. The master called it weakness. I called it justice. Still, I pitied her in a way. For when the curse grips you, there is no escape, not even for those who once wielded the whip. One afternoon, I was summoned to her chamber. She sat on the floor, her nightdress torn, her hair tangled. She beckoned me close with a trembling finger. I hesitated, but her eyes were wet, her voice fragile. They won't stop, she whispered. The voices. They tell me what you all suffered. They show me chains, ships, children screaming. I see it when I close my eyes. I feel it on my back. The lashes, the blood. Her body shook as sobs broke from her chest. For a moment, I almost believed she had been given a shard of understanding, that the curse had forced her to taste the truth of our lives. But then her face twisted. She grabbed my wrist with surprising strength, nails biting deep. They say it's your fault, she hissed. Spit flecked her lips. They say you called them. You brought them into me. If you don't stop, I'll... Her words cut off as her body seized. She convulsed violently, foam gathering at her mouth, her eyes rolling back. I pulled free and stumbled back as she shrieked, not in her voice, but in men crying out from ship decks, women wailing for their stolen infants, the sound of chains rattling. Her scream rose until it cracked, and then she collapsed, limp as a rag. The family rushed in moments later, finding me kneeling beside her. They accused me of poisoning her mind, of casting spells. But even as they dragged me from the room, Catherine's body twitched, her lips still moving, and I heard the faintest whisper, "We remember." From that day, Catherine was never the same. She tore at her gowns, ripped the curtains from the windows, clawed at the walls until her fingers bled. She smeared her blood in strange patterns, circles and crosses no one taught her. She laughed at nothing, cried at nothing, screamed until her throat cracked. The master tried to restrain her, locking her in her room, but she always found a way to escape. Once they found her standing barefoot in the field at dawn, her hands raised, her mouth chanting in a tongue none of them knew. Another time, she climbed to the roof and threatened to leap, claiming the sea was calling her name. The curse had hollowed her, filled her with echoes, and left her a shell. When she finally did leap from the second-floor balcony one stormy night, Her body struck the earth with a sound that silenced even the crickets. She lived, but her spine broke, leaving her twisted in bed, unable to walk, unable to rise. Her screams still echoed through the house, but they were not screams of madness anymore. They were screams of memory, memories that were not hers to carry. And in that I saw the hand of the ancestors. The mistress had fallen. Now the eldest daughter was broken. The curse had no intention of stopping. The mistress lay buried beneath stone. Catherine lay broken in her bed, and still the curse pressed closer. It showed no mercy, no pause. The master, who had once strutted through the halls with his whip like a king with a crown, now moved as if the floor beneath him shifted with every step. His arrogance remained, but it cracked. Desperation seeped through. I watched him from the shadows of the house and the fields. His shoulders hunched, his eyes darted toward empty corners. At night, he drank himself into a stupor, stumbling through the halls with a pistol in his hand, firing at sounds only he could hear. Each shot left smoke clinging to the wallpaper, but never struck what hunted him. The fields mocked him. The cotton still blackened. The corn refused to rise. Overseers abandoned him, muttering that no wage was worth a cursed plantation. Even his neighbors, once eager for his company, kept their distance, whispering that Ravencraftoft was touched by the devil. The master hated nothing more than being powerless, but powerless he had become. One evening I was summoned to the parlor. He sat in the great chair, shadows deep under his eyes, the veins of his hands bulging as he gripped his whiskey glass. His daughters stood behind him, Eliza pale and trembling, little Anne clutching her sister's skirts. Catherine's screams carried faintly from upstairs, filling the air like a violin string pulled too tight. He gestured for me to step forward. His voice was hoarse but sharp. "You've brought this on us, Saraphina. I know it. The whispers, the sickness, the storms. It's your kind of sorcery. You will end it." I stood silent, staring into his bloodshot eyes. How could I end what had been planted long before I was born? How could I silence the earth itself? "You will pray," he barked. "You will burn your charms. You will burn your charms. You will call off your spirit." Or, he lifted the pistol and pressed it against my forehead. The steel was cold, his hand trembling. Behind him, Eliza gasped. Little Anne whimpered, clutching tighter. Even they saw what he did not, that his threats were hollow. I did not flinch. "Pull the trigger if you must," I whispered. "But no bullet can kill the dead, and no bullet can kill truth." His face twisted. His hand shook so violently that the barrel slipped from my brow. He hurled the pistol into the fire, cursing. For a moment he looked less like a master and more like a cornered beast. That night, I saw him pacing outside beneath the moon. He muttered to himself, clawing at his hair, digging his fingers into the dirt, as though he could rip the curse from the soil with his bare hands. When the wind rose, rattling the branches, he shouted into the night, "Show yourself, fight me like a man." But the dead do not fight like men. They fight like oceans, like storms, like time itself. The following days brought more humiliation. He invited another preacher, a fiery young man from town who promised to purge demons. The preacher lasted only one night. Before dawn, he ran screaming from the house. His hair turned white as ash, his Bible abandoned on the steps. The master chased after him, shouting, but no words could drag the boy back. His neighbors stopped visiting entirely. His letters for aid went unanswered. His fortune dwindled as crops failed and creditors circled. I felt no pity. I had known hunger, grief, and loss every day of my life. Now he tasted a drop of it, and already it was breaking him. But the curse was not finished. One night, I woke to the sound of boots pounding across the floorboards. I crept toward the great house and saw the master stumbling down the hall, half-dressed, his lantern swinging wildly. He kicked open doors, dragging his daughters from their beds. "Up," he roared, "up, we leave tonight." But when he flung open the front door, the path outside was gone. The road had twisted into a swamp of mud and shadows, trees bending low as if to block escape. The lantern flickered, nearly snuffing out, and a low moan rose from the earth itself. Eliza screamed, clutching Anne. The master shoved them back inside, slamming the door. His breath came ragged, his eyes wild. "It won't let us leave," he muttered. "It, the land, the curse." He knew now that it was not just me, not just whispers. It was everything. That night I heard him weeping in his study. Not shouting, not raging, just weeping. A sound I had never thought his throat capable of. But tears do not wash blood from the earth, and no prayer of his would make the curse relent. The night the fire came, the air was thick with waiting, as if the earth itself held its breath. For weeks, the house had creaked with unseen footsteps. The fields had rotted in silence, and the family had unraveled in their grief. But now, the curse was ready to speak in flame. I knew it before it began. That evening, the wind refused to settle. It circled the cabins, rattled the shutters of the great house, bent the trees until their branches clawed the sky. The smell of smoke was not yet in the air, but I tasted it, sharp, bitter, inevitable. The master had been drinking heavily. His words slurred as he staggered through the halls, pistol in hand again, shouting at shadows. His daughters cowered together, trembling as Catherine's screams echoed from upstairs. Eliza clutched Anne, her eyes wide, her lips moving with prayers. But the prayers found no purchase. Just past midnight, the fire erupted. It began in the barn, a glow against the horizon, faint at first, then rising bright as the moon. Flames leapt from the hay as though a spark had been planted in every corner. The horses shrieked, the cows bellowed, the animals crashing against their stalls in terror. By the time the overseers roused themselves, the barn was a tower of fire, its roof collapsing in a shower of sparks. The blaze spread fast. The wind carried embers across the fields, dropping them into the dry stubble. Cotton bolls ignited like kindling, the fields lighting up row by row until it looked as though the earth itself had set its own wounds alight. I ran to the door of my cabin and stood frozen, the heat pressing against my face. The sky turned red, black smoke swallowing the stars. My people gathered around me, their eyes wide, their mouths open in awe. Some whispered prayer. Others laughed. A bitter, trembling laughter that carried both joy and fear. For years we had sweated in those fields, bent our backs beneath the sun, bled into that soil. Now the land was burning itself clean. The master bellowed orders from the steps of the great house. Buckets. Save the fields. He shoved his daughters toward the servants, demanding they form a line to the well. But the well water turned foul in the pails, black as tar, thick as molasses. No matter how they hauled, no matter how they poured, the fire only roared louder. And then the house itself caught. The roof above the kitchen flared, shingles snapping in the heat. Smoke poured from the windows, curling like fingers. The family screamed. Catherine's cries from her bed rose shrill and piercing, a harmony with the crackle of fire. I should have feared for my life, but instead I stood steady, the flames reflected in my eyes. I felt Oyas' breath in the storm winds, felt the ancestors pressing close. They had chosen this night, and nothing would halt their hand. The master pushed through the door, dragging his daughters behind him. His face was slick with sweat, his hair wild, his pistol clutched uselessly in his hand. He looked less like a master and more like a man stripped bare, desperate and undone. He saw me standing at the edge of the yard, his lips curled, fury twisting his face. "You did this," he roared. "Witch, devil, you'll burn with us." But the wind rose, carrying sparks straight to his feet. Flames licked at his boots, forcing him to stumble back. His curses drowned beneath the roar of the fire. The daughters wept. Eliza dragged Anne toward the fields, but the fields were no refuge. They were walls of fire, hemming them in. Catherine's shrieks echoed from the house, her broken body still trapped upstairs, the flames climbing ever closer. I closed my eyes. For a moment I let the sound wash over me, the crackling, the roaring, the crying, the breaking. And in that sound I heard something else, singing. It was faint at first, then swelling, voices layered upon voices. The songs of my ancestors, the hymns of the stolen, the chants of the chained. They rose with the fire, louder than screams, brighter than flames. The slaves around me dropped to their knees. Some raised their hands to the sky. Some wept openly, shoulders shaking, for they heard it too. The Ravencraftoft plantation, built on blood and bone, was devouring itself in fire. When dawn came, the great house was a skeleton of charred beams. The barn a heap of smouldering ash, the fields nothing but blackened soil. Smoke curled lazily into the sky, and the air reeked of ruin. The master still lived, though bare. He staggered through the yard with his clothes singed, his skin blistered, his eyes hollow. His daughters huddled near him, coughing, soot streaking their pale faces. Catherine was gone. Her screams had ended in the blaze, her body consumed. I stood at the edge of it all, smoke curling in my hair, ash clinging to my skin. And though the fire had nearly taken us all, I felt no fear, only a calm certainty. The curse was not finished. The fire was only its messenger. The fire should have been the end. Any ordinary curse would have been satisfied with the ruin it left behind. But ours was not ordinary. It was old, it was deep, and it was written into the marrow of the earth. Fire was only the beginning. When the flames died down, silence fell over the plantation. The air hung heavy with smoke, the kind that clung to your throat and would not let go. The fields smoldered, the cabins stood blackened, and the great house loomed like a tomb, gutted and broken. Still the master and two of his daughters lived. Eliza the elder carried Anne like a shadow, dragging her through the ashes with the stubbornness of one who refused to let go of hope. But hope has sharp edges when it cuts against fate. It began with Eliza. In the days after the fire, she moved about like a ghost herself. Her once fine gowns were in tatters, her pale hands blistered from smoke and labor, yet she clung to order. She shouted commands at what remained of the enslaved, tried to rebuild, tried to force us to sew, to clean, to carry water as though life had not been consumed in flame. Her voice cracked when she gave her orders. She did not look me in the eyes, but I watched her. Always I watched her. One night I heard her whispering to Anne, "We can still leave, we can still sell the land, we can still go north." Her words trembled, but she held on to them like lifelines. Anne only stared, her eyes hollow, her body weak from smoke and hunger. But the curse had already chosen Eliza for its next blow. The first signs came in her dreams. She woke screaming in the night, clutching her throat, gasping as though someone pressed invisible hands against her skin. When she looked into the mirror the next morning, bruises bloomed where no hands had touched her. She covered them with scarves, but no silk could hide the truth. Then the laughter began. At dusk, when the sky turned red, the sound of children's voices floated across the yard. They giggled and whispered, running feet pattering over ash. Eliza would whirl around, her eyes wide, calling Anne's name. But Anne sat silently beside her, too broken to rise. The laughter circled her, playful and cruel, a reminder of the ones she had ordered beaten, the little ones she had sold south when their mothers begged her mercy. The laughter followed her everywhere. She tried to shut it out with hymns, but the hymns soured on her tongue, turning to curses. She tried to shut it out with drink, but the more she drank, the louder the voices grew, until they sang nursery rhymes in unholy harmony, each note dragging her closer to madness. The slaves watched in silence. We did not interfere. We could not. This was her burden, her punishment, her unraveling. One evening, as the sun sank low, Eliza stumbled into the yard, her hair wild, her eyes red from lack of sleep. She carried a lantern, its flame flickering against her pale face. "Come out," she shouted. "Come out, whoever you are." But no one came, only the laughter. She swung the lantern wildly, its light cutting through the smoke still lingering in the air. She turned toward the cabins, toward me, her eyes full of fury. "You," she spat. "You've done this. You and your witchcraft." Her voice cracked into a sob. She raised the lantern higher, threatening to set the last cabins ablaze. But then something moved behind her. I saw it clear as day, a shadow, tall and thin, slipping out of the ruined house. It did not belong to any living body. It moved with a rhythm like swaying branches, like something caught between earth and sky. Eliza turned, her breath catching. "Who's there?" The shadow answered only with a whisper. The words were too faint for the others, but I heard them clear as my own name. "Your mother's sins burn in your veins." Eliza screamed and dropped the lantern. The flame burst against the dirt, but instead of spreading, it curled inward, circling her feet like a snake. She stumbled back, tripping over the ruins of the yard, her skirts caught smoldering, smoke rising fast. I rushed forward then, not to save her, but to witness, to bear the weight of what was happening. Eliza clawed at her skirts, shrieking, her pale face lit orange in the firelight. The laughter grew louder, filling the air, echoing from the fields, from the cabins, from the very bones of the earth, and then silence. The fire vanished as suddenly as it came, leaving her clothes untouched, her skin unburned. She collapsed onto the ground, shaking violently, her eyes rolling back as if something had hollowed her out from within. When she awoke the next morning, her hair had turned white as ash. She no longer spoke commands. She no longer gave orders. She stared into nothing, her lips moving silently as though she still heard voices none of us could. Anne tried to comfort her, but Eliza pushed her away, trembling whenever touched. She had been marked, claimed, and every one of us knew what that meant. The curse had broken her mind. If Eliza's unraveling was slow, like a rope fraying strand by strand, Anne's came swift, like glass shattering with one blow. She had always been the quiet one, fragile as porcelain, her eyes wide and unblinking, her voice soft as moth wings. But in the ruins of the plantation, quiet could not protect her. The curse had been patient with her elder sister. With Anne, it was merciless. At first she clung to Eliza, even when Eliza's hair turned white, and her voice fell into whispers only she could hear. Anne sat beside her, smoothing her skirts, rocking her like a child. She tried to hum lullabies their mother once sang, but the tunes broke apart in her throat, sour and flat, the notes bending into something unholy. By the second week after the fire, Anne began waking in the night with her fingernails bloody. She scratched at her arms, her throat, the walls, as if something inside her skin was trying to claw its way out. I heard her cries through the thin cabin walls they had forced us to rebuild, high-pitched and trembling, the sound of someone losing herself piece by piece. She spoke less with her sister and more with shadows. I saw her one morning crouched in the ashes of the burned barn, her face streaked with soot. She whispered into the ground, as though the earth itself answered her back. When I asked what she was doing, she lifted her head slowly, her eyes glazed. "They're under there," she said. "All the children. They're calling me." Her voice cracked on the word children, and I felt my blood run cold. For Anne, the curse did not bring bruises or laughter. It brought vision. She saw what had been hidden, what her family had buried beneath layers of power and wealth. She saw the faces of the stolen, the broken, the lost. At first she whispered their names, stumbling over syllables foreign to her tongue. Then she began to scream them, her thin voice echoing across the yard at night, tearing the sky open. The master tried to silence her. He shook her, slapped her, shouted until his voice broke, but Anne would not stop. She looked at him with wide, unseeing eyes and said, "They are waiting for you too, father." He flinched, and for the first time I saw real fear in his face. The haunting grew stronger. The air thickened around Anne, heavy as tar. Doors slammed when she passed. Windows cracked without touch. Animals refused to go near her, the dogs whining and shrinking back as though they saw what we could not. Even the wind seemed to follow her, howling when she wailed, falling silent when she went still. One night I followed her. The moon was sharp and silver, cutting across the blackened fields. I watched as she stumbled barefoot across the ash, her nightdress glowing faintly in the moonlight. She moved toward the old oak at the edge of the property, the one where chains still hung rusted against the bark. She pressed her hands to the tree and began to hum. The sound was broken, jagged, more moan than melody, but the air shifted. The ground trembled beneath us, faint at first, then harder, enough to rattle the chains. I felt the presence of the ancestors close, so close their breath touched my skin. Anne's humming rose to a shriek. She clawed at the bark until her fingers bled, her voice tearing her throat raw, and then she fell silent. I ran to her side. Her body was rigid, her eyes rolled back so only the whites showed. Her lips moved soundlessly, but I heard the words all the same, carried not by her voice but by the voices of those buried deep. "She carries their sins. She will not be free." The ground split at the base of the oak. Just a crack, narrow and jagged, but enough for the smell to rise. Damp earth rot and something older than time. Anne screamed and scrambled back, her body shaking violently. I pulled her away, though I knew I should not have touched her, for she was marked now. By morning she would not eat. She would not drink. She sat in the corner of the ruined cabin, rocking herself. Her hands clutched tight around her knees. She whispered over and over, "There under the tree. They're waiting for me. They're waiting for me." The master, desperate, brought a preacher from the nearest town. The man stood trembling in the doorway, clutching his Bible, sweat beading on his brow as Anne's eyes locked on him. She hissed when he tried to speak scripture, her lips curling into something not her own. The candles in the room snuffed out all at once, plunging them into darkness. The preacher fled before dawn, mumbling of demons and vowing never to return. By the end of that week, Anne was gone in every way but flesh. Her body remained thin and trembling, but her spirit had been carried away, claimed by those she tried so long to ignore. I watched her with sorrow but no pity. For the curse was not cruelty, it was balance. The weight of centuries pressed upon her, and she could not bear it. The Ravencraftoft family had nearly reached its end. Only the master remained whole, though even he staggered under the shadows that clung to him. His ruin was near. I could feel it in the air, sharp as the edge of a blade. And I, Saraphina, still stood, bearing witness. The land had devoured his daughter's body and spirit. The fire had stripped his home to bones. The curse had gnawed away at his nights until even sleep turned against him. Yet still the master clung to life, as though pride alone might hold back the judgment that pressed closer with each passing day. I had watched him through all his unraveling. At first he raged. He shouted at the sky, at the fields, at me. He cursed my name, cursed the blood that ran in my veins, cursed the god of the Africans and the god of the whites alike. His voice carried into the night a roar against the silence, but silence always answered him. Then his rage shifted to fear. I saw it in the way he carried his pistol everywhere, even to the privy, even to his own bed. He would pace the yard with it clenched in his hand, eyes darting at every shadow, every rustle of leaves. The firelight of his lantern carved deep hollows into his face, so that he looked half dead already. A man burned from the inside. His nights were the worst. He screamed in his sleep, thrashing in his bed, clawing at his sheets, as though bound by chains unseen. The words he cried out were not of this world. They were the cries of the whipped, the moans of the lynched, the hollow wails of mothers torn from their children. He spoke them in voices not his own, his throat shaping syllables he could never have known. The slaves gathered outside his window, silent as stone, listening. It was not glee we felt, but justice. For once, the torment that had been ours now belonged to him. By day he drank. By night he trembled. His pistol clattered from his hands more than once, and I knew then his grip on the world was slipping. One evening he stumbled into the yard, drunk beyond reason, his face pale, his lips cracked. He raised his pistol toward me, his hand shaking, his eyes red. "You did this," he whispered, though his voice carried like a scream. "You cursed my daughters. You set the fire. You—" He trailed off, staring past me. His mouth fell open, his pistol lowered. I turned slowly, though I already knew what he saw. Shadows, dozens of them, standing at the edge of the fields, where the blackened cotton stalks still jutted from the earth. They were tall and thin, their eyes burning faint in the dark. Some bore chains, some carried hoes and sickles, some were only outlines of smoke and ash. But all of them were real to him. They were the ones he had killed with hunger, with whip, with cruelty. They had come to claim what was left of his soul. He dropped the pistol and fell to his knees. "Mercy," he begged. "Please, God, mercy." But there was no mercy here, not for— The shadows advanced, slow, deliberate, their steps crunching over the scorched soil. His sobs turned to screams. He tried to crawl backward, but his legs tangled beneath him, his body betraying him as it always had others. I stood still, the wind whipping my skirts around my ankles, my eyes locked on his. I wanted him to see me, truly see me for the first time. Not as property, not as labor, not as less than human. I wanted him to see the woman who bore witness, the woman who carried her ancestors' will. And he did. His gaze found mine, and I saw it in his face, recognition, fear, and at last understanding. He fell forward into the dirt, clutching at the ground as though it might save him. The shadows closed around him, their forms flickering, merging, growing darker. His screams echoed across the plantation, high and broken, until they were swallowed by the night. When silence returned, he lay still. His chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, but his eyes stared blank, his mouth slack. Whatever part of him had been human was gone. The master of Ravencraftoft Plantation was no longer master of anything. The curse had claimed him. The land itself seemed to sigh. The wind calmed, the night grew still, and for a moment I thought perhaps it was finished. But curses as old as ours do not vanish in a single breath. They coil and linger, weaving themselves into bloodlines, into soil, into memory. I stood over his body, the moonlight silvering the ash in my hair, and whispered, "It is done," but in my heart I knew it was only the beginning. When the master fell, silence wrapped itself around the plantation like a burial shroud. No screams, no orders, no sound but the whisper of the wind through the burned-out stalks of cotton. For the first time in my life, Ravencraftoft stood still. The others looked to me. They gathered in the yard where the fire had left its scars, their faces ash-marked, their eyes wide. Men, women, and children who had bent their backs to the lash now stood upright, waiting. Not waiting for orders, for something else, something deeper. I could not tell them what to do. My lips trembled when I tried. My whole life had been spent in chains, under command, with the master's will pressing down like a weight I could never escape. Now that weight had lifted, but freedom did not come like sunlight. It came like a storm that left us blinking in its wake, unsure of where to step. The fields lay blackened. The cabin smelled of soot. The great house was a husk, its windows hollow, its beams charred. No place here held comfort, no corner held safety, and yet the silence carried a strange peace. I walked among the cabins, past the ashen ruin. My people followed, some clutching children, some holding each other's hands. The young ones did not laugh. They watched me with solemn eyes, as though they understood more than they should have. We stopped by the old oak. The chain still clung to its bark, rusted and twisted, clinking softly in the wind. I reached out and touched the cold iron. My hand trembled, but I did not pull back. "They are gone," I whispered, though my voice cracked on the words. "The ones who bound us. Their blood has been taken by the fire. Their breath has been stolen by the curse. We are still here." The crowd behind me murmured, soft as a prayer. But though the masters had fallen, I felt no joy. What I felt was weight, heavy, relentless, pressing into my bones. It was not the weight of chains, but of memory. Every scar, every lash, every stolen life, they lived inside me still. The curse had not lifted them away. It had only turned them back upon those who had made them. At night I lay awake and listened. The silence was not empty. It was full of whispers. The voices of my ancestors, the ones who had carried me through, the ones who had demanded balance. They hummed in the corners of my cabin. They drifted through the cracks in the walls. They sighed in my dreams. Sometimes I woke with tears on my face, not from sorrow, not from joy, but from the sheer weight of being alive when so many were not. The others asked me what came next. "Do we run?" one of the men asked. "Do we leave this cursed ground?" I had no answer. My tongue felt heavy. My eyes wandered to the fields, blackened and barren, and I thought of the miles beyond, forests, rivers, towns where we might be hunted, captured, dragged back. Freedom was not simple. Freedom had teeth. Still, a part of me longed to leave, to step beyond the fence posts, beyond the burned crops, and breathe a life that was not tethered to Ravencraftoft. But another part of me knew, curses do not vanish with distance. They follow, they cling. One evening, I stood alone in the yard where the master had fallen. The moonlight washed the earth pale. His body had been buried hastily by the few who still obeyed him, laid shallow in the ground at the edge of the field. No marker stood there, only the dirt freshly turned, as though the earth itself begrudged keeping him. I stared at that mound of soil and waited for movement, for shadows, for anything. Nothing stirred, and yet the silence seemed to press harder in that spot, thick and suffocating. I whispered, "Your name will not be remembered." The wind answered with a sigh. For days after, the others began to leave. One by one they slipped into the night. Men taking their wives by the hand, mothers carrying children against their chests. They did not speak of it, but I saw them go. They wanted distance, wanted to shed the ashes and the whispers. I did not stop them. Some chains are invisible but no less heavy, and each of us carried them in our own way. But I stayed because the land itself held me. I had been born here. My mother's bones fed this soil. My ancestors' blood had soaked it, and their songs still lingered in the air. To leave felt like tearing myself in two. The silence was not peace for me. It was a reminder, a promise, that what began here would not end here. I sat beneath the oak one night, the chains cold against my back, and I swore it aloud. This story will not be buried. This silence will speak. And in the stillness that followed, I heard it again. The faintest hum, the ancestors singing. The silence was their song, and I, Saraphina, carried it forward. Time moved strangely after the master fell. Days bled into nights, nights into days, each one heavy with the same silence. The cabins emptied one by one, footsteps fading into the distance as families sought lives far from the ruin of Ravencraftoft. But I remained. I remained because the land was more than chains, more than lashes, more than fire. It was also memory. It was blood and bone, laughter and tears, songs sung low in the dark. To leave it would be to leave them, the ones who came before me, the ones whose whispers still moved through the trees. I rose with the sun each morning and walked the blackened fields. No cotton grew there now. The earth had swallowed it, scorched it, left only ash. Yet I felt the pulse of life beneath my feet, stubborn and waiting. Roots moved unseen, carrying secrets deeper than any master could ever dig. Sometimes I would pause and close my eyes, and I swore I could hear them. The footsteps of those who had bent in those same rows, the soft weeping, the quiet humming that once kept time with labor. The land remembered, the great house rotted, rain poured through its broken roof. Vines climbed its scorched beams, birds nested where fine curtains once hung. What had been a monument to power and cruelty was now only a carcass picked clean by nature. I did not mourn it. I welcomed its ruin, but the curse, it did not end with fire, with screams, with death. Curses cling to blood. They follow names, follow lines, follow the children of the guilty. I felt it in my bones. The master's daughters were gone, their voices swallowed by madness and fire, but the stain of their lines stretched outward, beyond Ravencraftoft, into towns and cities where their kin would scatter. And so the curse followed. I cannot tell you how I know, only that I do. Nights when the wind turned sharp, I would see flickers of faces not my own. Pale children staring into the dark, hearing laughter that was not theirs. Men waking with bruises shaped like fingers, women trembling at shadows they could not name. It was not only here, it spread, carried on blood like seeds scattered in the wind. I would sit beneath the oak tree and whisper to the earth, "Let them remember, for that was the truest punishment. Not death, not flame, but memory. To carry forever the weight of what they had done. To be haunted by voices they could not silence. As for me, I bore my own memories. I bore the sound of chains rattling, the sting of the whip, the cries of mothers and children. But I also bore the voices of my ancestors, the ones who gave me strength, who turned my grief into fire, who stood with me when the curse rose to claim balance. I aged. My hair turned silver, my hands colored. The younger ones called me the Root Woman, the Conjure Woman, the last of Ravencraftoft. Some feared me, some honored me. I did not mind either way. I was not here for fear or honor. I was here to remember. On nights when the moon was full, I lit candles in the windows of my cabin. I set out bowls of water, sprinkled herbs across the floor, sang the songs my mother taught me. and the air would thicken with presence. The ancestors gathering close, humming, swaying, filling the silence with their eternal hymn. I spoke to them as I would to family. I told them of the fire, of Eliza's madness, of Anne's descent, of the master's ruin. I told them how the others fled, how the land still held its scars, how I chose to stay. And they answered not with words, but with warmth, with a strength that wrapped itself around my weary bones. Years passed, and still I stayed. The land shifted with the seasons. Grass pushed through ash. Wildflowers grew where cotton once stood. The soil softened, drinking rain, cradling life again. Nature does not forget, but it forgives in ways men never. And I knew when my time came, I would not leave this place. My body would join the bones of my kin in the soil. My voice would join the chorus in the silence. My spirit would walk the fields at night, watching, waiting, reminding, for curses do not die, stories do not end. They pass from tongue to tongue, from ear to ear, until the living carry them as truth. So I tell you now, remember what was done here. Remember who paid, who burned, who bled. Remember the voices that still echo in the silence. I am Saraphina, daughter of the enslaved, witness of the curse, keeper of the song. And as long as this land breathes, my story will not be forgotten.